The crowd rose to its feet, gasping and crying out in shock and surprise. They had come to listen to an inspiring dialogue about freedom in art amidst the tranquil ease of an annual summer gathering of lakeside learning. But before the program could begin, a figure lunged onto the stage, arms thrashing, blade gleaming, as the assassin furiously and repeatedly struck his target. Audience members rushed the stage to subdue the attacker and to tend to the victim, but the damage had been done. The author's body and life had been marred, and the forces of hatred, extremism, and intolerance seemed to win the day. And yet, even as he lay bleeding on the floor, his resolve to speak out in the face of a decades-long threat was a compelling act of bravery. A few days later, the vanquished candidate took the podium against the stunning backdrop of a Great Plains evening in the waning hours of Election Day. Her definitive defeat at the ballot box did not diminish the ardor of her faith in our country, nor the depth of her ideals. She went even further, proclaiming that this loss for her was a win for the nation. She invoked the specters of the Civil War, the dangers of division and the victories of those who fought against threats to our democracy, especially those who did so with body and soul, the last full measure of their devotion. Her political career, rooted in the generations and defined by its strident intensity, was over. Yet her ultimate pursuit, placing the needs of citizenship over the narrowness of partisanship, was a triumph far more lasting than the outcome of any single contest. There are moments in life that are dramatic, defining, and transformative. They are often the sum total of a lifetime of efforts and ideals. They require conviction and commitment. They demand sacrifice and selflessness. And they forever alter the course of our lives and of those around us. The vicious stabbing of Salman Rushdie and the political downfall of Liz Cheney testify to the inspiring impact of such iconic moments and the potential for a life to be defined by one heroic act. Rushdie's more than 30-year struggle, living under a decree of death from Iran for the sin of penning a novel that drew upon Muslim tradition, has become a rallying cry for the rights of artistic expression in the face of religious extremism. Liz Cheney's stalwart resistance to the cultish enabling of violence, insurrection, and authoritarianism by most in her party has made her a pariah within a movement in which she and her family were royalty. But for Rushdie and Cheney, the risks were worth the pursuit of principle, as they willingly bore the cost to their lives and livelihoods. But let's be clear. Both these figures are not consistent exemplars of virtue and values. Rushdie's life of privilege and protection, residing in the comforts of the West rather than the perilous climes of the Muslim world, has often been more a platform for celebrity than a profile in courage. And Liz Cheney's recent conversion into a champion of democratic ideals came only after January 6th, and a career of regressive, reactionary, and callous political expediency. And yet, these single acts of heroism provide an inspiring model for all of us who seek to elevate our erring, sometimes selfish, and often apathetic lives into something more, something greater, something lasting. These acts spur a passion for purpose and principle, which can be as life-changing for the actors as for those who witness their example. The classic story of the hero, whether emerging from holy books or Hollywood, was described by the famous scholar of myth, Joseph Campbell. He describes the hero's path. A person sets out on a solo journey of body, mind, and spirit. He or she encounters obstacles and challenges, overcomes them while growing in the process, and eventually brings the fruits of newfound insight back to the community. From Moses to Luke Skywalker to our very own pathways from adolescence to adulthood, the hero's journey is as much a tale to admire as it is a roadmap to becoming fully human. These legends are simply the ways in which cultures convey these values to the next generation, as deeds of lore arouse in us a longing to achieve greatness. But aspiring to heroism is more about critical moments than crafting an identity, more about what we do than who we are. And those defining moments can empower us to realize our potential for good and blessing despite our faults, foibles, and failures. My father, alav shalom, loved movies and found an engaging way to blend his passions for our tradition and cinema. In his renowned movies and midrash class, he'd often show a segment from his favorite film, Casablanca, that demonstrated how an unlikely person can rise to a moment of nobility. At one point in the film, Humphrey Bogart, the owner of Rick's Cafe and Casino, speaks to a young woman. She recounts how she secretly made a deal to sleep with the French prefect in return for exit visas, for she lacked the money needed to buy them. She sought Rick's advice, lamenting that her husband could never know, for he would never understand. In desperation, she places her last bit of money on the roulette wheel. Standing nearby, Bogey, a gun-running ne'er-do-well who seems only interested in himself, fixes the wheel, enabling her to win the funds needed so as not to compromise her virtue. My father connected that scene to a famous Talmudic story about Rabbi Abahu, who dreams of a man named Pentekaka, an unlikely figure who becomes capable of praying for rain, something only the truly righteous can do. Pentekaka is the man of 5 sins, most having to do with his work in a brothel. The rabbi finds the man and asks if he has ever done one good deed. Pentekaka replies that he met a woman who was about to sell herself to redeem her husband from prison. The supposed sinner sold his bed, the most essential symbol of comfort and security, to give her the funds to free her husband and prevent her debasement. The rabbi declared that indeed, Pentekaka's one act rendered him worthy of praying for rain. Imagine if one act at the right time could define how others see us, and more importantly, how we see ourselves. Not that one word or deed can give us absolution for a host of sins, errors, and crimes. That's a reading from another hymnal. And even for my Catholic friends, that is an overly simplistic get-out-of-hell-free card. But such a rising to the moment can be a turn toward a better, more worthy life. Most of us struggle with far more mundane but no less trying tests of character. And our tradition makes clear that though we all have feet of clay, we can seek through our actions and our aspirations to ascend a little lower than the angels. The pithy and terse wisdom of Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our ancestors, offers another take on a more accessible and thus more impactful example of heroism. Rabbi Ben Zoma teaches, Ezehu Gibor, Hakovesh et Yitro. Who is mighty or heroic? One who can subdue his impulses. As with so much in Western culture, Judaism offers a counterintuitive lesson. Power and triumph are less about battles won, dragons slain, and lands conquered. True heroism comes from a mastery over our urges. Can we rise above our hardwired concern for self and kin, our pursuits of wealth, influence, and popularity, to stand up for what is right, regardless of how others see us? to stand up for the good despite the cost to fate and fortune, to stand up for principle despite the risk to our person. That distinction between heroism as understood by the wider culture and our tradition comes through in two dramatic words shared by Moses to his successor Joshua, chazak ve'ematz, be strong and resolute, or of good courage. The task that lay before Joshua was like that of Moses before him, to guide our people to their destiny. But even more importantly, to lead less with the sword than with the heart, less through imposing fear than by stoking faith, less by a show of power than by a demonstration of character. Joshua didn't always succeed, nor did his circumstances always allow for it. But in the striving, there is a kind of victory. A more modern expression of this notion is the value of ometz lev, or moral courage. It is the cultivation of personal integrity for our own growth and as a model for others. And it is a trait not merely limited to the famous, renowned, and noteworthy. It is a glimmer of possibility that lies within each of us, awaiting a moment of truth, of principle, and of vision to shine forth and change the world. So how can we better live out this virtue of ometz lev, the courage of our convictions, and thus meet the heroic and transformative moments in our lives? On a broader public level, we can embrace the true essence and responsibility of citizenship. It is the secular version of brit, of covenant, a bond of mutual obligation, care, and intention. To be a good citizen fundamentally is to have a stake in the well-being and the destiny of the greater society towards the greater good. But when tested by torrents and trials, when demagogues threaten with messages of hate, mobs metastasize around diseases of delusion, and the very pillars that sustain the structure of state are rocked to their foundations, each of us must gird our chazak ve'ematz, our strength and courage, to confront that which seeks to destroy us. We are in such a moment. Our American way of life is under siege. Our imperfect but incomparable democracy, our vexing but vital securing of freedoms, and our hard but hopeful path into the future hang in the balance in ways not seen since the Civil War. And so, we face a call and a choice. The call to heed the shofar sound of citizenship, awakening our awareness and affirming our resolve to meet this test of our patriotism. And we must choose to ride the ebbing tides of complacency, cynicism, and denial, or to stand upright and proudly against the tempest that engulfs us, peering through the dark clouds of conflict to see the beacon of light and hope and faith that have sustained us as a nation for centuries. On a personal level, ometz lev, the courage of our convictions, must seek to repair the building blocks of our nation, the bonds that link each of us to one another. I've spoken repeatedly in this season and years past about the bravery and vision required to rise above the things that divide us, red and blue, rural and urban, left and right. But we must also affirm those qualities that we share by virtue of our essential humanity, the birthright of dignity, comfort, and security, relief from the sting of humiliation, condescension, and inferiority, and trust in one another and our shared enterprise. Let us reach out across the divisions that rend us, with hands ready to work and hearts willing to heal, so that we might forge a mass movement that will bring us back from this brink, reminding us that true courage, deepest integrity, and genuine heroism lies within each of us, waiting to illumine and enlighten a troubled but trying world. Janusz Korczak was already a renowned Polish Jewish educator and activist before the war. His theories on teaching and advocacy for the rights of children were prophetic, predating many current trends by decades. His nurturing of children inspired him to establish 2 orphanages in Warsaw, one in the Jewish part of the city. As the specter of Nazi genocide moved across Europe, it arrived at Korczak's doorstep in the creation of the Warsaw Ghetto. As a man of considered notoriety, many of his supporters implored him to leave the ghetto under an alias and go into hiding. So widespread was his reputation, and so invaluable were his philosophies to the broader world. Korczak declined, opting to stay with his beloved children in the ghetto's Jewish orphanage. Eventually, the murderers came to liquidate the ghetto. They prepared to march its inhabitants through the streets to the plaza of the train station for deportation to the black abyss of instant death at Treblinka. Again, Korczak's friends pleaded with him to escape with his life, but his life's work and his life itself was with the children. And so he stayed to guide them, to comfort them, and to meet their fate, a true teacher of the human spirit to the end. 80 years ago last month, Korczak marched with his 200 charges in 5 orderly lines, with the dignity and resolve of those forced to bear witness to their core humanity in its final moments. He comforted the fears of the littlest ones and buoyed the bravery of the older ones, serving as a true mophate, a truly righteous exemplar of one of the greatest acts of courage, sacrifice, and idealism ever recorded. To have given one's life not in a battle of arms, but in a triumph of the spirit, is to have achieved a truly lasting and luminous legacy. The call of our current times is not as dramatic nor as tragic as Korczak's. Not yet. But it is no less important and compelling. May we each look within to find the hero to meet this moment. And may our deeds of love and lore inspire those who follow us to forge a world worthy of such acts of valor. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. And let us say, Amen.